Good morning, friends. Today we will have a talk on Google Meet on the cause of sorrow, followed by a study class from the Book of Images, continuation of that. Next Sunday at 11 a.m., we will continue our study on Google Meet of the key to theosophy. Declaration.
I'd be happy to read it.
Yeah, sure.
The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of theosophy and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among theosophists and the furtherance of unity. It regards as theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all.
Thank you. And we'll touch on the three fundamentals.
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you.
The secret doctrine establishes three fundamental propositions. The first fundamental statement of secret doctrine is the metaphysical one absolute, and it describes that as an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible because it transcends human conception. It is essentially beyond the range of thought, and in words of Dukkha, it's also referred to as unthinkable and unspeakable. Essentially, it is beingness rather than being, and again, it's beyond our speculation. It's also referred to as one reality, symbolized by the term the great breadth. In a different point of view, it's also reflected as the highest point in the higher triad, the impersonal, universal spirit, one with the self of all. It embraces both being and not being, the one reality. In many ways, it's also the absolute and the one witness. The second fundamental assertion of the secret doctrine is the absolute universality of the law of periodicity, of flux and reflux, ebb and flow. It is the alternation of day and night, life and death, sleeping and waking. The third fundamental proposition asserts the identity of all souls with the universal oversoul. It describes the obligatory pilgrimage of every soul through the cycle of incarnation in accordance with cyclic and karmic law. And it states that in order for every divine soul to acquire an independent or conscious existence, it has to have passed through every elemental form of the phenomenal world of that manvantara and acquired individuality or consciousness, first by a natural impulse, and then by self-induced, self-devised efforts, and as always, checked by its karma. And in this way, it ascends through all the degrees of intelligence, from the lowest to the highest manas, from mineral and plant up to the holiest archangel, which is also referred to as Dhyani Buddha. The third fundamental also asserts that esoteric philosophy admits no privileges or any special gifts, but that accepted those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit throughout a long series of metempsychosis and reincarnations.
Thank you. Our devotional reading for today comes from the voice of the voice, starting on page 18, page 8, the last paragraph of this. This first paragraph we also read last week, I think. That which is uncreate abides in thee, disciple, as it abides in that hall. If thou wouldst reach it and blend the two, thou must divest thyself of thy dark garments of illusion. Stifle the voice of flesh, allow no image of the senses to get between its light and thine, that thus the twain may blend in one. And having learned thine own Judaya, flee from the hall of learning. The hall is dangerous, and its perfidious beauty is needed but for thy probation. Beware, Lanu, lest thou by elusive radiance thy soul should linger and be caught up in its deceptive light. This light shines from the jewel of the great star, Mara. The senses it bewitches, one's mind, and leaves the unwary an abandoned wreck. A moth attracted to the dazzling flame of that nightlight is doomed to perish in the distant oil. The unwary soul that fails to grapple with the mocking demon of illusion will return to earth the slave of Mara. Behold the host of souls. Watch how they hover over the stormy sea of human life, and how exhausted, bleeding, broken-winged, they drop one after other on the swelling waves, tossed by the fierce winds, chased by the gale. They drift into the eddies and disappear within the first great vortex. If through the hollow bosom thou wouldst reach the veil of bliss, disciple, close fast thy senses against the great heresy of separateness that weeds thee from the west. Let not thy heaven-born merge in the sea of Maya. Break from the universal parrot, but let the fiery power retire into the innermost chamber, the chamber of the heart, and abode of the world's worst mother, the world's mother. Then from the heart that power shall rise up into the sixth, the middle region, the place between thy eyes, when it becomes the breath of the one soul, the voice which filleth all, thy master's voice. And now for today's thought. Oh, there's only one, then thou canst become a walker of the sky, who treads the ones above the waves, whose step touches not the water. Very important sentence. So, okay, next now we'll have the talk on the quarrels of Saul.
Okay, friends, I'm going to share my screen. Do you see the slides, or is it
Uh, we can see the file. Can you put it in presentation mode?
Yes.
Yes, we can see it. I can see it.
Okay, that's better. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks for the feedback. Hey, friends, this talk is on the cause of sorrow. Sorrow is a universal experience, but it's also a doorway to wisdom if we understand its cause and purpose. Theosophy, being the synthesis of the world's wisdom traditions, explains what the causes of sorrow are and gives us a framework for understanding the fundamental principles which underlie our shared experiences and all of life. This wisdom is a living wisdom, which emphasizes self-transformation and service, and is not just an intellectual exercise. As we journey through life, it becomes clear that while pleasures come and go fleetingly, we are never entirely free from pain, sorrow, and suffering. Suffering is an inseparable part of existence, a reality shared by all beings. Birth itself involves pain. Life brings with it illness, aging, and ultimately death and separation from those we hold dear. The impermanence of all conditions inevitably gives rise to a sense of dissatisfaction and restlessness, as nothing lasting or permanent can be grasped in the external world. This cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, known as samsara, is perpetuated by the illusion of separateness. It is rooted in our ignorance of our true nature, which is not divided or individual, but one, and interconnected with all other beings and with the whole of life. It is this ignorance of our intrinsic unity that lies at the very heart of our suffering, obscuring the path to liberation and peace. Mr. Crosbie has said that if we could clearly perceive and understand the underlying causes of sorrow and suffering, both the pain we endure in everyday life and the immense suffering brought about by collective actions such as war, we could cease to make these causes. This requires a deliberate and transformative process of gaining wisdom, the wisdom to see beyond the illusion of separateness and impermanence, and to align our lives with the deeper truths of existence. Traditionally, humanity has assumed that its sorrows arise from external causes, whether from some higher being or beings, from other people, or from the immutable laws of the universe. Rarely, if ever, have we turned inward to consider that we might be connected to the very causes of our suffering. As a result, we continue to seek relief from external sources, believing that something outside of ourselves can bring us lasting freedom from sorrow. However, neither the religions that have existed throughout history, nor the sciences that have advanced our understanding of the material world have been able to provide this knowledge. This is because the root cause of sorrow does not lie outside of us, but within each of us. We each contain within ourselves the power to create suffering, and just as importantly, the power to bring it to an end. Recognizing this truth is the first step towards liberation, for it shifts the focus from seeking external solutions to cultivating inner understanding and transformation. This condition was called by the Buddha in his Four Noble Truths, the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. The idea that suffering is a part of life. All beings experience suffering during their lifetime. The first noble truth states that all existence is enmeshed in suffering, dukkha. Whatsoever exists comes into being and must eventually pass away. Constant change is inescapable and entails much pain. Psychologically, the past, present, and future entail suffering, for recollection breeds remorse, and anticipation engenders anxiety. Human consciousness is caught in a contest between inexplicable fear and ineradicable hope. Its imaginative capacity to visualize a better condition induces further pain, owing to the glaring gap between what is and what might be. Suffering is indeed the piteous plight of all sentient beings. Theosophy offers profound insight into the causes of sorrow. It teaches that every being is, at his or her core, spirit, a spark of the divine essence. The power of spirit is boundless and illimitable, yet we restrict its potential through our limited beliefs and lack of awareness of our own spiritual birthright and powers. This changeless spirit resides at the heart of every being. It is the source, sustainer, and guiding force behind all forms of existence. Spirit is the driving power of evolution, the universal force that unites and governs all things, no matter their stage of development. Every being unfolds from within outwards, striving for greater expression and realization of one's inherent divinity. As human beings, we have reached the stage of self-consciousness, unlike the lower kingdoms of nature, and with it comes the unique power of choice. This means we can consciously draw upon the infinite spiritual source within us and even realize our divine nature while living in a physical body. However, at this stage of evolution, our passions and desires often dominate our thoughts and actions, becoming the primary causes of sin, sorrow, and suffering. These desires, rooted in selfish thoughts and personal cravings, are concerned only with the self, disregarding the needs and desires of others. Unfulfilled desires cause pain, but even fulfilled desires fail to bring true happiness. No sooner do we satisfy one craving than another arises, perpetuating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. This constant pursuit of personal desires leads to conflict, both within ourselves and with others. With the many competing and conflicting desires we hold, we harm one another in ways we often fail to recognize. We exploit, injure, and take advantage of one another, creating a world where we metaphorically prey upon and devour each other. But this was never the original plan for human life. There is no necessity for such selfishness or the suffering it brings. Many, if not most, of our woes are self-inflicted, arising from the pursuit of personal gratification. One way to address this is to begin reducing the number of desires we hold. The original plan for humanity was vastly different. It was intended that we learn to harness our desires, gain control over our lower nature, and use our self-conscious will to align with the higher purpose of spirit. Theosophy reminds us of this plan, to awaken to the truth of our shared oneness as spirit, to transcend selfishness, and to live in harmony with the greater whole. By doing so, we can overcome the sorrow and suffering that stem from our lower nature and instead fulfill the deeper purpose of life, to realize our divine unity with all beings. If suffering is inherent to conditioned existence, then the path forward lies in attaining unconditioned existence, those states which are beyond pain. This is not a lesson that can be learned in a single day, nor even within the span of a single lifetime. However, the recognition that we must align all aspects of our being, our principles, thoughts, and will, toward this effort underscores the profound need for transformation. This condition was called by the Buddha in his Four Noble Truths the second noble truth, the truth of the cause of suffering. This is the idea that suffering is caused by craving or grasping, which is also known as taṇhā or thirst. The second noble truth states that all suffering has a basic cause. If this were not so, there could be no means of release from the bondage of sensory-bound existence. The entire assemblage of immediate causes of misery may be traced through a long chain of causation to a single source, taṇhā or trishna, thirst. This continual thirst or deep-seated craving for embodied existence is not simply the pure objectless desire to be, which is nirvana, because no impure desire can penetrate that unqualified and unquantified state of peace. As all craving is for sentient life in manifested form, mental, physical, and even spiritual, and such a manifested form necessitates limitation, coming to be and passing away, so this craving is unceasing. But in our everyday lives, the misery, sorrow, and suffering we experience has a mission. It is most often the misery we bring upon ourselves that forces us to pause, reflect, and ask what is right. Only through the experience of our mistakes do we learn to discern the difference between right and wrong. And in this process of discernment lies the entire story of progress. It is by falling into error and learning from it that we gain the wisdom to move forward and make progress. We should study ourselves and use our mistakes to find a new and better way to think and act. The first step in our progress is the ability to distinguish between right and wrong. Growth is only possible through the recognition and use of the pairs of opposites. Duality is woven into the very fabric of nature. While all human beings are one in spirit, our expression in the world is dual. There is always the actor and something to act upon. Spirit, Purusha, and matter, Prakriti. These are not two separate entities, but two aspects of one underlying reality. Without this duality, perception would not be possible. We must first experience darkness to recognize light, just as we must endure pain to truly understand pleasure. The interplay of opposites, pleasure and pain, light and dark, action and reaction, forms the foundation of perception. It is through this dynamic interaction that intelligence advances from the lowest levels of awareness to the highest. The entire universe operates under the rule of law, and this law is grounded in duality. We call it the law of periodicity, but in essence, it's also the law of karma, the principle of action and reaction. Karma teaches that every cause produces its corresponding effect, and these effects are inseparable from their causes. The effects are, in fact, contained within the causes themselves. One of the aphorisms on karma clearly states the nature of karma can be known by calculation from cause to effect. And this calculation is possible because the effect is wrapped up in and not succeeding to the cause. What we perceive as the laws of nature are in truth the interplay of actions and reactions arising from various levels of intelligence. The cycles of the season, the passing of time, and even the experiences of individuals and nations are all governed by this law. The collective actions of a people in one time bring about their collective circumstances in another, demonstrating the universal nature of cause and effect. Karma is said to operate on all things and beings from the minutest conceivable atom up to Brahma. Proceeding in the three worlds of men, gods, and elemental beings, no spot in the manifested universe is exempt from its sway. Every thought, every feeling we generate leaves an impression, and that impression returns to us, either enriched or diminished, depending on its nature. By this same law, false and mistaken ideas can perpetuate themselves indefinitely, creating a cycle of reactions that brings about continual suffering. When the immense power of spirit within us is misdirected, used in ignorance of our true nature and the interconnectedness of all beings, it results in the sorrows we experience. Thus, the key to liberation lies in recognizing this power within us and aligning it with truth and wisdom. No one can prevent us from continuing on a mistaken path as long as we stubbornly cling to false, personal, and selfish ideas. Our evolution has been shaped entirely by our own actions, operating under the universal law of action and reaction. It is a mistake to think that good fortune or progress comes to us from external sources. It never does. Whatever good or evil we experience is simply the harvest of seeds we ourselves have sown in thought, word, and deed. There are no exceptions to this law. When we cry out for justice, we must realize that we are already receiving it, for every experience we encounter is a reflection of our own thoughts and actions. Let us remember that the true plane of action is thought itself. What we call action is merely the outer manifestation of ideas. For this reason, it is essential to examine and clear away the false and unhelpful ideas we hold. Too often, our minds are cluttered with a collection of borrowed beliefs, ideas handed down to us by others, by society, by traditions, or by ideologies. We accept these second-hand ideas without question and mistakenly call them our own. In truth, such a mind is not our own at all. The mind in its true essence is the power to choose, to receive or reject ideas. What we choose to accept or reject depends entirely on our own discernment, on whether we act out of ignorance or wisdom. There is no external knowledge we must acquire to complete this task. Instead, the work lies within. Our primary responsibility is to understand the nature of our own being, to uncover the truth within ourselves, and to free our minds from the chains of unexamined ideas. This condition was called by the Buddha and his Four Noble Truths the third noble truth, the truth of the end of suffering. Nirodha, the idea that suffering can end through the cessation of craving. The cessation of suffering, or dukkha, comes with a cessation of craving. The third noble truth states that this ubiquitous cause, which initiates the entire chain of causation, can be countered, transcended, and negated. The truth of the end of suffering is living the life. This condition was called by the Buddha and his Four Noble Truths the fourth noble truth, the truth of the path to the end of suffering, marga, the idea that there is a path to the end of suffering, known as the Eightfold Path. The Four Noble Truths affirms that the well-tested means by which all misery is ended is the Noble Eightfold Path. It is the middle way between self-indulgence and self-mortification, neither of which is edifying. The Eightfold series of interrelated stages of spiritual awakening leads to the fullness of freedom. The Four Noble Truths are a pragmatic way of looking at the world and how to improve it. The goal is to achieve peace, freedom, and wisdom. The Noble Eightfold Path is a set of practices in Buddhism that is intended to end suffering and achieve self-awakening, and from which we can learn much about ourselves. The 8 practices are right view, accepting things as they are rather than focusing on how you wish things to be. True progress begins with cultivating the right understanding and embracing the reality of what is. This process starts with a clear perception and a firm grasp of the Four Noble Truths, combining mental discipline with a flexible, open-minded approach to concepts and ideas. Right intention. The intention of renunciation and goodwill lies at the heart of right thought. Right thought is the deliberate and resolute commitment to release selfish desires and to follow the Eightfold Path with confidence and determination, striving toward its ultimate goal. Right speech. Abstaining from lying, abusive speech, divisive speech, and idle chatter. Right speech embodies the principles of nonviolence, benevolence, and harmony. transforming the individual's most powerful tool of interaction into a force for good. By practicing right speech, one not only fosters peaceful and constructive relationships with others, but also cultivates inner tranquility of thought and emotion. The Buddha wisely taught never a harsh truth and never a falsehood, however pleasing. Right action. Right action exemplifies the principles of conservation of energy, timeliness, and economy, while also serving to calm and purify the emotions. Although various lists of prohibitions have been drawn up by Buddhists over the centuries, the fundamental principle of right action remains unchanged. Acts of appropriation and expropriation, taking what is not freely given, are inherently improper. Right livelihood. Right action is supported and made practical in daily life through right livelihood. If our actions should avoid causing harm to others, then our means of livelihood must also be free from exploitation. One's work in the world, however modest it may be, should contribute to the universal well-being and welfare of all. Right effort. Cultivating virtuous qualities and abandoning non-virtuous thoughts and actions lies at the heart of right effort. Right effort is marked by a steady and continuous endeavor, fostering the growth of positive habits and the purification of the mind. Through persistence and mindfulness, it supports the maintenance of clarity, focus, and a harmonious way of being. Right mindfulness. Mindfully directing one's thoughts toward the cessation of suffering is the essence of right mindfulness. Right mindfulness involves vigilant attention to one's thoughts, feelings, and actions, as well as their interactions with the intentions of others and the surrounding environment. By cultivating awareness in each moment, one learns to observe and understand the causes of suffering and to align one's actions with the path to liberation. Right concentration, or right meditation, is a mental discipline that serves as a foundational practice of the spiritual path. It requires a steady cultivation of one-pointed concentration throughout daily life, combined with regular periods of deep absorption and elevated states of consciousness. Through disciplined practice, the mind becomes tranquil, focused, and attuned to higher truths. This path is divided into 3 themes. We could summarize them as good moral conduct. Right understanding, right thought, and right speech are grouped under the theme of good moral conduct. Meditation and mental development is the second theme. Right action, right livelihood, and right effort to align them with the higher purpose of spirit are grouped under the theme of meditation and mental development. And the third theme, wisdom and insight. Right mindfulness and right concentration constitute the cultivation of a rich and deep inner life, aligned with the highest spiritual motivations of oneself and all others. The Eightfold Path is often presented as a sequence of steps, but in truth it represents intertwined and recurrent stages of growth that unfold at progressively deeper levels of understanding. Wisdom both initiates and crowns the journey, while right conduct, Shila, serves as both the catalyst and the fruit of profound meditation. Meditation, in turn, purifies the mind, deepens compassion, strengthens moral integrity, and refines wisdom into a unified wholeness that transforms even the simple act of breathing into an expression of benevolence. Thus, as one ascends a spiral stairway of being, returning to the same points from greater heights, advancing steadily and confidently toward an ever-expanding horizon of awareness and enlightenment. The Buddha also taught the profound doctrine of dependent origination, which offers an alternative to the conventional notions of causality as an explanation for the cyclical process of samsara. It helps to shed light on karma, action and reaction. The Buddha recognized that the common understanding of causation as a series of necessary connections between essential sequential events relied on unwarranted assumptions that extend beyond strict observation. He also perceived that reducing causation to isolated generalizations derived solely from sensory or time-bound experience obscured the operation of the law of karma. Rejecting the linear and temporal notion of causation altogether, the Buddha synthesized his insights into the powerful concept of dependent origination, wherein conditions arise interdependently because of their relations, one set of conditions giving rise to another set in a continuous chain. This framework accounts for the uninterrupted flow of transient and phenomenal existence, without resorting to extraneous metaphysical assumptions, such as a personal God, or seeing causation as a fixed sequence, such as event A causing event B. The Buddha rejected such a rigid, time-bound view of causation, emphasizing instead a more nuanced interdependence. In the concept of dependent origination, causes and conditions arise mutually. There is no first cause or isolated event. This approach avoids the metaphysical assumption of the absolute linearity in causation. In other words, nothing exists independently. Everything is contingent upon interdependent factors. By removing some of these metaphysical distractions, the Buddha's teaching remains practical and focused on the direct causes of suffering and their cessation. This bold understanding not only integrates the Buddhist doctrine of the skandhas, the 5 aggregates that constitute the illusion of the lower self, but also resolves the perplexing question of personal identity. In dependent origination, every condition arises from some preceding condition, and to arrive at an understanding of this cycle, the Buddha began with the common root of fundamental ignorance, avidya. Ignorance gives rise to compounded formations, sanskaras, such as mental tendencies, which in turn generate differentiated consciousness. Such differentiated consciousness leads to name and form, which in turn give rise to the faculties, the mind and senses. These faculties, when interacting with the external world, produce contact, which gives rise to sensory and emotional responses. These reactions generate craving or thirst for experience, which leads to attachment. Attachment in turn results in becoming, which leads to birth and consequently aging and death. Thus, suffering is an inherent feature of embodied existence, not a random misfortune or an external evil, but the natural result of the ceaseless chain of dependent origination, which makes embodied life itself possible. Instead of presenting this just as a method to personal liberation, the Buddha expounded the bodhisattva ideal, which calls upon all compassionate individuals to seek enlightenment, not for their own sake, but for the benefit of all beings. In this ideal, self-sacrifice becomes self-emancipation, as the bodhisattva relinquishes attachment to the personal sensory self and undertakes a progressive ascent through the stages of spiritual attainment. This path is made possible by the cultivation and perfection of the 10 paramitas, or qualities of purity in daily life. These are expounded in The Voice of the Silence by HPB. And the first 6 of these paramitas, generosity, morality, patience, effort, meditation, and wisdom, are considered the essential prerequisites for pursuing the bodhisattva path successfully. If a significant number of people in the world were to reach a deeper understanding of their true nature and use their inherent spiritual powers for the benefit of others, the misery of the world would be profoundly diminished in a remarkably short time. As the ancient saying goes, a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. One of the great teachers affirmed this truth, declaring, "Give me 500 good, earnest, sincere, devoted men and women, and I will move the world." Humanity's progress does not depend upon physical evolution or scientific advancement. These are merely tools, not ends in themselves. Were we to recognize the vast potential of our spiritual powers, those tools could be used to achieve heights of development that are currently unimaginable. Ultimately, the evolution of the human race to a higher stage, greater than anything that has ever existed, depends on humanity awakening to its true nature and acting from that understanding. As long as we continue to repeat the same patterns of thought and action, sin, sorrow, and suffering will persist. War, disease, pestilence, natural disasters, and other calamities arise directly from humanity's errors and ignorance. Until we change our basis of thought, these consequences will remain inevitable. With an understanding of action and karma, we will never seek nor find vicarious atonement. We must accept the results of what we have sown. Recognizing that we are responsible for our own conditions, we must do our best to adjust them. True readjustment begins when we reclaim our spiritual birthright, rather than identifying ourselves solely with these transient bodies that are born, live briefly, and perish. This process requires fulfilling our duties in all directions as opportunities present themselves. Progress cannot be achieved in isolation. We cannot work out our own salvation alone, nor can we live or advance completely apart from others. We cannot raise ourselves far beyond the rest of humanity without extending a helping hand to uplift them to the stage we occupy. In doing so, we continue to grow ourselves, becoming better equipped to guide and teach others. Great spiritual figures such as Jesus and the Buddha exemplified this truth. They achieved what they did through deliberate effort and transformation. There was a time when they too were erring mortals like ourselves, but they recognized the true path, turned toward it, and followed it with persistence, making necessary adjustments along the way, just as every being must. As long as we cling to the false belief that we are merely physical beings and chase after fleeting desires, we postpone the day of readjustment and continue to suffer from the effects of the causes we ourselves have set into motion. But when we replace false ideas with correct understanding and align our thoughts and actions with truth, the brain begins to clear and becomes receptive to the immense knowledge of the inner self. It becomes permeable to the light of spirit. The brain must become a good conductor for spiritual knowledge. If we truly possessed such knowledge, would we still cling to desires? Would we waste our energies chasing after the fleeting things of physical life? True knowledge would show us that nothing in the universe can obstruct the spiritual progress we have laid out for ourselves. It would also reveal that nothing can truly harm or confuse us, but trust in the law of our spiritual nature. We would seek not personal gain, but instead to serve others in every way possible. In this way, we would align ourselves with the greater harmony of the whole. The forces and natures of all beings would then carry us forward on the stream of life and progress. In such a state, there would be no room for sorrow, for we would be fulfilling the true purpose of spirit and soul, to assist all other souls along the path, as far as the opportunities before us allow. On this course, there is no need to strain or struggle. All that is required is to embrace the opportunities that come to us as a result of our own past actions. When evil comes, it is simply something to adjust and balance. When good comes, it is likewise the fruit of our actions, and we may receive it with gratitude. We should face both good and evil without fear, without resistance or avoidance, meeting each with equanimity. This is the path the masters have shown us. The masters of wisdom know no sorrow themselves, but their only grief is to see humanity repeatedly immersing itself in sin, sorrow, and suffering, cycles of pain that they cannot prevent. When one of them was once asked, "With your great knowledge and power, why do you not compel men to think as they should?" The master replied, "The human soul is not so constituted. It must see and act for itself. True action arises from within and unfolds outward, and it is through such self-induced and self-devised action that power is developed. No one can save us but ourselves. There is no higher religion than truth, and truth leads to the end of sorrows." And that concludes the talk, and now we can open it up for questions and comments.
Hi, you covered a lot of ground, and the bottom line is that we got plenty of guidance with you, with all that you presented. You mentioned the 10 parameters. We point to that. So there's plenty of guidance, but the point, I guess, what I'm trying to get at is we have to not worry too much about what caused this to happen. We pay attention to it sometimes we can figure it out, but we have to look at that guidance that you laid out and the parameters and other guidance that appeals to us along that line, and pay attention to the selfishness that we naturally have, and I guess a statement, a question. Nowadays, we know what the problem is. The big problem is that we think is external to us, but all of the other problems lead to that, I think. So I guess we do what we can with respect to the politics and the other parts, and we pay attention to what we can do something about. And if we can do that, then the rest will kind of take care of itself, because one person at a time is what will cause the bigger problems to, or what we think about is the biggest problems to evaporate.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much practical advice we've been given. We have to follow it. Like, work on reducing the number of desires we have, because we know that they'll likely end in a perpetuation of the cycle. Engaging in right speech, not lying, no idle chatter, like things like that are good practical advice to keep the whole cycle of reincarnation in mind from day to day. May help us be more focused on raising up ourselves and those around us than the goal of attaining something just for this personal existence, this personal personality that naturally wants to acquire things. That whole cycle is just fruitless in itself. and instead, shift our focus to, developing an inner life, a love of service, thinking how we can add to the sum of welfare, of all beings. And it might be very, something very small, like making a peaceful environment at the table with the family, or could be sending someone a nice note. It could be very small, but these are all practical things we can do to advance the welfare of all and the raising up. Because by raising others, we raise ourselves, and by raising ourselves, we raise others. The whole interdependency really is a good focal point for practical action.
Or the worst thing we can do is not do anything.
Mhm.
We gotta, that is in effect an action in itself. So we
Right.
gotta try.
And keep fighting against our own karma that we brought to ourselves. It is so easy to feel like we're experiencing injustice when, a negative karma or something we really see that we don't want to happen does happen. It's easy to, resist it, but as that was Mr. Crosbie who said that is our justice. We are experiencing it. Just shifting the mind to adjusting it. Instead of eliminating the pain, how can we adjust it? Making adjustments along the way was another big thing that came out in Mr. Crosbie's article, What is the Cause of Sorrow?
Thanks, Kathy. So HPB once said something along the lines that man's destiny is ordered by himself. It doesn't come from anywhere else. But you made a really good point that thought is a true plane of action. I think everything originates there, right? And on the thought plane. And just wondering, and you talked about the dependent origination doctrine put forth by Buddha. Do you think that if we, the light on a path says somewhere that we should turn our mind to the eternal thought, and so by doing that, all earthly thoughts, there's no oxygen for earthly thoughts to really gain ground or establish themselves. How would you how would we not escape but gradually pull away from one cause leading to the next cause, and really be able to, start the beginning of the end of suffering? Because that's the end. That's how it starts, right? It's a low personality that leads to all those, the whole chain of cause and events of thoughts. So.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. The thought is the driver of all our actions, and that's the plane we have to make the adjustments on in order to create a new way of going forward. So definitely taking time to think about high themes in meditation, to focus on the eternal, to focus on the infinite, helps draw our mind, helps to align it so that our principles are focused on the highest, and the rest will fall into place, so to speak, once they are more or less permanently aligned. But the more we can practice it, it seems the better. So taking time out to do that each day, to focus on these things, and also to return to them in little ways in daily life that we can, should also be a part of it, because it's easy in life for things to get busy and maybe not get to that time we've set aside. So by focusing it in different areas, it'll help remind us to align our thoughts with universals, and away from the personal, because as long as we're enmeshed in personal desires, we just sort of create this positive feedback loop of engendering causes and then experiencing pain or sorrow from them. Or even if it is a pleasure, as was mentioned, it's fleeting and makes us just want for more, and we're never truly fulfilled by our desires. So another thing we could do is all the things we're going after in life, just put them into perspective. It's not that we shouldn't try to get that better job or, take that vacation or whatever it is, but keep it into perspective that it is going to be a temporary, and after that, am I just going to want something else? And to sort of shift our focus back to universals, because our thought does lead our actions.
So I think it's a good, certainly a critical step to try to put a little bit of time into thinking on the higher level. Maybe if we can, we'll try to set, Mr. Judge said, set aside a time for the day, but kids get in the way too. So you do have to do your best to at least reserve a little bit of time in the day to focus on the higher message that you're talking about, and try to remember that whenever we're participating in our activities of the day.
Yeah, and just things like these meetings, even once a week, help remind us of, our higher purpose and our true spiritual nature. So, in some ways it can be difficult, but in other ways it can be easy and effortless. I thought it was interesting that he said not to struggle, to just, accept things as they are, and to make adjustments, see everything that comes to us as the result of our action, the harvest that, comes to us, but also to make adjustments. So if something bad happens, not to rail against it. If something good happens, not to become attached. But to keep to the middle way, essentially. The Buddha said, don't go to extremes with anything, because it's by sort of the middle way and threading the needle that we can grow in the most balanced way until our knowledge can take us further, because it'll clear the mind and the brain will become a better instrument for receiving, reflecting the higher, and then it'll be easier to, share it with others in all the ways that we can.
I think our discussion today is a good segue into our afternoon meeting too. So we can continue on with that 12:10 or so, and to setting the afternoon. Yeah.
Okay, so I should have done that. Take a break and come back in 10 minutes, 5 minutes.
Yeah. Hi, Carolina. Welcome back.
Good to see you, Carolina.
Thank you. It was a great presentation to start the year and remember that what Buddha taught us. It's we have to keep in mind that everything, our lives is everything we brought up to ourselves.
Mhm.
Good and bad.
Absolutely.
Okay. See you all in a few minutes.
Okay.
Thank you, Kathy. See you.
Thank you, Kathy.